Translator, Henyi. Editor, Henyi. Within the depths of Ling Han's mind, countless new principles and martial insights surged forth like tidal waves, each revelation blooming one after another. The more he comprehended, the more exhilarated his heart became, to the point that joy nearly overflowed from his chest. He had always been a person of exceptional intellect. In his previous life, he had ascended to the title of Alchemy Emperor, and that alone was the clearest testament to his brilliance. What was even more astonishing was that he had achieved such an exalted position without the guidance of any predecessor. Relying solely upon his own comprehension, he had carved a supreme path in alchemy. Was that not an extraordinary feat? Now, however, he had redirected the sharp edge of that intelligence toward martial arts. Every fragment of his focus, every strand of his will, was devoted to scaling the ultimate summit of martial cultivation. Overwhelming transformations were taking place throughout his body. Every inch of flesh, every tendon and bone was evolving toward a balance of strength and flexibility. His body now sought to contain both firmness and gentleness simultaneously. On the surface, such a concept might appear simple, yet in truth, achieving it was incomparably difficult. Truly, far too difficult. People were accustomed to the state of their own bodies. Once a habit had been formed, breaking it was exceedingly hard. Moreover, allowing the body to stretch and bend like the blood-sucking origin gold, granting it such terrifying elasticity, was not merely a minor change. It was a complete qualitative transformation. It was the act of shattering one's limits and forging oneself anew. Inside his dantian, the tiny figure that was Ling Han's spiritual infant sat solemnly, guarding the sea of energy like a vigilant sentinel. Its expression was grave, as its hands formed one mysterious seal after another. The indestructible heaven scroll had long since been branded upon its being, and now the spiritual infant was unraveling a profound and enigmatic technique. From within the depths of his body, it harmonized and guided the transformation, strengthening the metamorphosis that Ling Han was undergoing. Time passed without him noticing how long. Finally, Ling Han raised the index finger of his right hand. With his left hand, he grasped that finger firmly and pulled with all his strength. Previously, if he had exerted such force, the entire arm would have been stretched violently outward. Yet this time, something strange occurred. His finger elongated and thinned like molten metal being drawn into a filament, dispersing half of the force he exerted upon it. However, when the index finger extended to roughly 30 centimeters in length, it could stretch no further. That was the limit. Ling Han could not help but reveal a smile. He had succeeded. At long last, he had succeeded. Although he was still far from reaching the astonishing level of blood-sucking origin gold, which could freely alter its form, this was nonetheless a clear step forward. It was tremendous progress. Again, once more. Ling Han did not remain seated. He rose and began to move his limbs continuously, swinging his arms and kicking with his feet. At first, everything appeared normal. Yet slowly, subtly, the reach of his fists and kicks began to extend farther and farther. It was not the techniques that were lengthening. It was his body. A brilliant light flashed through Ling Han's eyes. This was not merely a method for dispersing force. Rather, it opened the door to an entirely different style of battle tactics. Others would assume that the reach of a fist determined the distance at which one could release origin power. But in truth, Ling Han's striking range could extend dozens of times beyond what others anticipated. Naturally, defending against such an attack would become extremely difficult. Furthermore, if his limbs could stretch indefinitely, could he not turn any battlefield into a close-quarters fight? After all, he had cultivated body arts. His physical body was comparable to precious metal of a higher tier, and his brute strength was equally terrifying. With both of these advantages combined, who could possibly contend with him in close combat? Yet Ling Han quickly discovered the limitations. Without the stimulation of an external force, the distance his body could extend was limited. It was like a spring. In theory, a spring could be stretched longer and longer, but only if external force was applied. Once the force disappeared, it would naturally snap back to its original state, unless it had already broken. Ling Han's body also possessed its most stable state. Thus, no matter how it changed, it would instinctively return to that natural form. What a pity. Ling Han shook his head inwardly. If he could manipulate his body to change shape like the blood-sucking origin gold, then he could create a completely new system of battle tactics, one capable of delivering killing strikes that would stun the entire world. Still, one should not be greedy. Ling Han smiled lightly. At present, he had already achieved a small measure of success. Now it was time to challenge that array sword once again. Ling Han stepped out from the Black Tower. Fortunately, the array sword had not recovered to immediately launch another killing attack. Otherwise, he would have truly been doomed. Come, let's fight again, he laughed, rushing forward of his own accord. Shoo, shoo, shoo. 7 streaks of swordlight burst from the blade and slashed toward him with terrifying speed. Ling Han snorted coldly as he continued advancing. This time, he did not even employ the demon fairy step. Instead, he allowed the 7 streaks of swordlight to strike him directly. Now he intended to use this sword to temper the soft aspect of the indestructible heaven scroll. Pooh, pooh, pooh. The 7 flashes of swordlight struck him head-on. The clothes on Ling Han's chest were instantly torn apart as the sword flashes cut across his body. In full view, his chest stretched backward like flowing silk. 3 meters, 6 meters, even 15 meters. Only when the power of the 7 sword flashes had finally been exhausted did the stretching stop. Peng! His chest snapped back violently. Ling Han's face turned slightly pale. Practicing on his own was one thing, but executing it to such an extreme degree during the very first real confrontation was still somewhat unbearable. 3 bones had been broken, and his internal organs had also suffered slight damage. After all, this was the attack of the array sword. A strike capable of cleaving even a deity transformation cultivator in 2. Ling Han had endured it head-on. How could he possibly escape without paying some price? However, what delighted him was that this time he had not been forced to retreat even half a step. He had turned his body into countless combinations of particles. The impact of the sword flashes had all been directed into his upper body and dispersed there. As a result, his lower body remained unmoved. It could be done. Ling Han was filled with confidence that he would conquer this treasured sword. Once again, the indestructible heaven scroll circulated throughout his body. The body of Diamond was famed for its indestructibility. Even if it suffered severe damage, it could automatically heal. Only a short while passed before his broken bones had already fused together, as though they had never been fractured at all. He continued to advance and clash with the sword. Yet human strength had its limits. After enduring too many sword flashes, Ling Han was eventually forced to retreat. Otherwise, he truly would have been cut in half. Still, the smile at the corner of his lips only widened. His understanding of softness was deepening rapidly. With every strike he endured, he improved. The injuries he suffered grew lighter and lighter. He had learned how to use the countless particles of his body to disperse the incoming force, not only stretching vertically, but also spreading horizontally. Previously, he had only turned himself into a spring. Now he had become like dough, capable of spreading in every direction. Thus, when another sword flash struck his chest, his entire torso expanded outward like the surface of water, his body thinned like a sheet of paper. Yet in doing so, the force of the attack was reduced by at least 90%. At this moment, the hard aspect of his cultivation also displayed its terrifying power. Trying to injure his body with only 1/10 of the original force, pa! His body rebounded instantly and returned to its original form. Ling Han's face was slightly pale. This time he had truly not been injured. However, that previous state was not his natural form, and maintaining it placed great strain upon him. Such transformations could not be maintained for too long. Otherwise, his body would collapse. Thinking of this, Ling Han suddenly laughed. If his body could truly stretch without limit, then wouldn't he be able to easily absorb attacks, even from experts of the Shattering Void tier? Yet the strength of a human was not infinite. This was the natural Dao of heaven and earth. Ling Han shook his head. His gaze locked firmly onto the array sword as he smiled faintly. I shall conquer you within 3 strikes. Shao! The thunderclap 9th heaven erupted as he charged forward once more. Peng, 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 peng! Sword flashes blazed like raging flames as they slashed toward him in a storm of killing intent. Ling Han showed no fear. Every inch of his body swelled and expanded, absorbing the incoming force without retreating even half a step. On the contrary, he extended his right hand forward, forcibly stretching it by an entire meter. After enduring 3 consecutive sword flashes, his hand finally closed around the hilt of the sword. Hong! A terrifying killing intent suddenly erupted and slammed directly into Ling Han's consciousness. Translator, Henyi. Henyi. This sword had been born for slaughter. The blade of the sword was carved with intricate array patterns, each line and mark forged solely for killing, possessing the might to sever the void itself. Now those array patterns transformed into boundless sword intent, surging forward and piercing directly into Ling Han's consciousness. Wang, the spiritual infant, rose into the air and entered his consciousness. It seated itself at the very center and began to guide the sword intent. Wrapped within the indestructible heavenly scroll, it radiated brilliant golden light, majestic and solemn like the descent of a supreme figure who had comprehended the great Dao. The overwhelming killing intent was instantly suppressed, and then slowly began to dissipate like snow melting beneath the warmth of spring. The indestructible heaven scroll, the supreme existence, merely revealing a tiny fragment of its power, had already allowed him to ascend the rankings that gathered every heaven-defying prodigy of the past 1,000 years. Even though this formation sword was incomparably terrifying and capable of cleaving through the void, once it encountered the indestructible heaven scroll, it was utterly powerless. This was a confrontation between different tiers of divine sense, entirely unrelated to battle prowess. This was a clash of quality itself. Could the indestructible heaven scroll possibly be inferior in quality? That would be a complete joke. The killing intent collapsed and scattered. The formation sword no longer emitted any brilliance. It now appeared no different from an ordinary blade. It was finished. Ling Han could not help but burst into loud laughter. Not only had he subdued a treasured sword, he had also made tremendous advancement in his body arts. The harvest this time was enormous. He held the formation sword and carefully examined it, his gaze filled with fascination toward the array patterns etched across the blade. However, they were far too complex. After observing for only a short moment, he felt his head pounding violently, producing weng, weng, weng sounds as if his skull was about to explode. He hurriedly looked away and calmed his mind for a while. Yet when he thought back on it, he could not help but feel astonished. Just moments ago, he had stared at the blade for quite some time. Yet he now could not recall even a single array pattern. It was as if a mysterious power had erased all memory of it. Ling Han did not dwell on it. He retrieved the sheath. However, compared to the sword, although the sheath was made of top-tier material, it could not be compared with the blade itself. The formation sword was forged from a rare metal of level 10, and the value of the array patterns engraved on its blade very likely surpassed even level 10. The material of the sheath was merely of the 9th tier, appearing extremely crude in comparison. Yet this was perfectly reasonable. The scabbard was never meant for battle. Using a level 10 rare metal to forge a sheath would be an extravagant waste. Moreover, even with level 9 metal, it already gave one the feeling of overwhelming luxury. The #1 killing sword in the world? Ling Han saw 6 characters carved upon the blade. Could this be the sword's name? It's again #1 in the world? Isn't that a little too high profile? It doesn't quite match my character. He casually tossed the sheath into the Black Tower. This object was useless. It would be better to melt it down and forge it into an arrow, allowing its material to be used more effectively. You carry such a powerful killing aura. From today onward, you shall be named Revere Life Sword. Do not kill lightly. It is the natural order of heaven and earth that all living beings grow and flourish, so one must not casually deprive other creatures of their right to live. Ling Han laughed. He gently shook the sword, and martial intent surged through it. Wang, several array patterns immediately lit up. With a single slash of the sword, 10 sword flashes suddenly appeared. Pooh, pooh, pooh. The surrounding walls were instantly carved with 10 shallow slash marks. It's so powerful. Ling Han was left speechless. This stone chamber had previously endured the fierce battle between him and the Revere Life Sword without collapsing, which already demonstrated its incredible sturdiness. Yet now, With merely one strike, slash marks had appeared upon it. This was proof of the terrifying power of the Revere Life Sword. He swung the sword once more. This time, sword ray burst forth from the blade. Hong, a dent nearly 30 centimeters deep, appeared on the wall. However, something astonishing happened. The wall began to tremble slightly, and the slash mark quickly disappeared. Ling Han was shocked. This tool pavilion actually possessed self-recovery abilities? Hiss! This tool pavilion itself was a treasure. Ling Han felt tempted. If he could claim the entire tool pavilion as his own, then wouldn't every treasure inside belong to him? At that exact moment, the previously closed door suddenly opened. He had already obtained the treasured sword, so there was no reason to remain here any longer. Ling Han stored the Revere Life Sword inside the Black Tower, placing it beside the Demon Birth Sword. Both swords floated mid-air in suspension. Yet the Demon Birth Sword automatically lowered itself slightly, not daring to remain on the same level as the former, clearly displaying the dominance of the Revere Life Sword. Swords possessed their own spirits, and even they would compare themselves with their peers. Ling Han stepped out of the stone chamber. The staircase lay before him. He glanced around and discovered that there were several stone chambers on this floor, but each one was tightly sealed. He attempted to open them, yet whether with fists or with his sword, the doors could not be broken. Helpless, he could only descend the stairs to the next level. On that floor, there were once again several stone chambers and another flight of stairs. He did not attempt to break open the doors this time, and simply continued downward. Previously, he had been on the 5th floor, so he needed to descend 4 flights of stairs before finally reaching the ground floor. He stepped outside and saw that many people still remained, all eager to test themselves upon the martial stone. Ling Han! Ling Han! Hunyu leaped over and immediately dived straight into his arms. She wrapped herself around his neck and said, "You've been gone for so long. Niu missed you to death." Ling Han himself did not know how long he had cultivated within the Black Tower, so he turned toward Jushuan who was walking over, and asked, "How long have I been inside?" 20 days, Jushuan replied. "Oh, that long!" Ling Han felt as though he had merely blinked his eyes, as if not even a single day had passed. How could 20 full days have already slipped by? "Did you all obtain anything?" he asked with a smile. "Yes! Yes!" Hunyu immediately jumped out of his arms. Niu got something fun. She suddenly summoned an enormous pair of scissors that was even slightly taller than herself. The entire weapon was crimson red. When the scissors were closed together, they resembled a coiled dragon covered in scales. The sharp tip formed a dragon's head, lifelike and vivid. "Go!" the little brat shouted, and the scissors immediately flew outward. They actually transformed into a red dragon, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws while releasing an astonishing divine might. "Oh, dragon fang shears. Lord Rabbit has seen this before in the notebook left behind by my ancestor," Rabbit said. According to legend, a true dragon once died in this realm. As the dragon's blood scattered across the land, it gave birth to countless treasured medicines, while the dragon's bones transformed into towering mountains that became what is now the sacred land of the 5 great sects. Furthermore, some places even turned into deadly forbidden zones filled with endless danger. The only thing that remained unchanged was the dragon's fang. A very long time ago, a supreme martial master obtained that dragon fang and forged it into the dragon fang shears. When its power is fully stimulated, it can unleash the terrifying might of a true dragon's bite. Everyone was shocked. Such a supreme treasure had actually fallen into Hunyu's hands. Incredible. Truly incredible. Even cultivators of the Shattering Void tier would be tempted by such a treasure. Ling Han smiled. He himself had obtained the Revere Life Sword. Should he face Shu Shu Ran's ultimate saber again, he would now possess the strength to counter it. Moreover, Hunyu had also obtained the Dragon Fang shears. The power of their side had advanced tremendously. Jushuan Wenren Qian, and Yuan Cheng. He had also obtained their own rewards. However, they had only received level 8 spirit tools, which paled greatly compared with the gains of Ling Han and Hunyu. As expected, the results achieved on the martial stone directly determined the quality of the rewards. With this outcome, Shu Shu Ran and Donglinger, who had hidden their true strength earlier, would probably feel so depressed that they might cough blood. Rabbit had also obtained a treasure, but it stubbornly refused to reveal what it was. Making everyone extremely curious, Ling Han did not see the Rain Emperor or Mu Rongqing. After asking Zhu Xuan'er, he learned that the two of them had indeed come here earlier, but they had already left. Now each of them had formed their own teams and become leaders. Their actions for the sake of the overall plan had to be reconsidered. Ling Han. Jia Ming appeared, staring fixedly at Ling Han, his eyes shining with a bloody light.